All right, welcome everyone to our afternoon plenary entitled, what's the official title that we gave it? Rohingya Refugee Crisis, Learning from the First Year of the Response. I'm actually really excited to be moderating this one because Sheila and I have worked on this one for, I think, the longest one out of all the sessions that we had. And one of the things that we heard from all of you during our stakeholder interviews and also from our USAID counterparts is that we knew that we needed to have something on the Rohingya crisis. We went through multiple interviews, multiple discussions, and one of the things that we did after we had our interviews is that we decided that instead of doing a traditional PowerPoint and instead of having people sit down and just throwing out numbers and stats, we realized that the people that we were talking to were natural storytellers. And one of the things that we did is we sat down and we drew out some themes from their stories. And we allocated themes and we basically said, you know what, these are the themes that we want to cover, these lessons from the first year response. And instead of having the PowerPoint, we're going to have these people sit down and just give you a story. So each of our presenters are today going to sit down for about 10 minutes and they're going to tell you a story with a lesson in it from the first year response. And we hope that you can take that lesson with you to the work that you're doing. And we're also going to have a Q&A session for you guys afterwards to be able to actually have a discussion around this issue. So to my left, we have Rachel Wolf, who will be going first. Rachel works for World Vision Bangladesh, and she's the response director based in Cox's Bazar. And her theme is going to be on needs assessment. Then after Rachel, we have we have Walter Mwasa, who is the chief of party of Shaharda 3, and he's with CARE Bangladesh. And as we all know, CARE was one of the first NGOs to be put out there as an initial response. So Walter will have a lot to say about that, and his theme is going to be on readiness. And then after Walter, we have Maheen, who is the program director for multiple projects with Save the Children in Bangladesh, and his theme is going to be on integration. So give a round of applause to these three individuals before they start to get them going. And then let's have Rachel.
Testing. All right. And thank you for your demand for this session. We really feel privileged to be among you and take a short break from a very busy response to reflect, contemplate, learn from each of you. So very valuable. Thank you. So as was said, I was asked to speak on establishing the needs and what that looked like in this very complex, sensitive response. And really establishing the needs was and remains about hearing the voices of the refugees themselves, hearing sufficiently and deeply and continuously from our beneficiaries. So I want to set the scene for you. Go back just over a year, and I'm sure all of you saw the images on BBC, CNN, Al Jazeera. We had one of the fastest growing refugee crises in the world. The rate of people crossing the river from Myanmar to Bangladesh. Absolutely overwhelming to first responders, overwhelming to the government of Bangladesh, to the local host community who was eager to help. And what did this really look like? Well, for those of us responding, it was very much about trying to address the intense, immediate needs, tangible things, food, water, sanitation. And the fact that this population movement, as we said, was massive. It was quite chaotic. And once we caught our breath, the need to scale up very rapidly on a large scale. So what happened? What did we do? Well, as we typically do in fast-moving emergencies, we did rapid needs assessment, right? So far, so good. It was rather ad hoc, most of us by individual agencies just trying to get in there and establish some facts and get things going. Also, we're talking about hundreds of thousands of new people joining already established refugee camps. In total now we have 34 camps across quite a wide geographic area when you think about it. And so these rapid assessments also were limited in geography. Which also gave us a less holistic view of what was actually happening. But what was the key challenge? And this is upon reflection, of course. Our consultations with communities were quite shallow. Why was this? Well, obviously we're trying to get in, ascertain the needs, get programs up and running, so limited time with people on the ground. Right? That's pretty typical in most earthquakes, tsunamis, other emergencies. But then it gets more complex from there. The area, the Cox's Bazar area of Bangladesh, where this response has been happening, is one of the more conservative, most conservative, I've been told, areas of Bangladesh. And the Rohingya, who had entered this area, even more conservative. So limited freedom of movement for women, very limited mixing of men and women, cultural, religious issues, and then from there, real gender power dynamics that on the surface looked pretty typical to a Muslim context, but we realized later were much more, had many layers. Language barriers. This is still a struggle, I think, for us to fully understand, but new research from Translators Without Borders shows that the Rohingya language really is not that similar to the local Chittagonian language. And by the way, the Chittagonian language, I've been told by experts, is more different from Bangla than Italian is from Spanish. And yet there were all these assumptions. Oh, we just bring in a few, Bangla's not that different, we bring in a few Chittagonian staffs, we speak the same language. Not true. Look a little deeper. Women, based on long-standing socio-cultural issues and education access, even access to markets, have, for many, many words, key to a humanitarian response, like medical treatment, have a totally different word from their men in the same community. So imagine what that looks like. Because of necessity, the urgency, the power dynamics, in these earlier days, and even somewhat today, a much heavier focus on consulting with the local community leaders, which were fairly arbitrarily selected by external actors, not the community themselves. We call them Majis. And then, of course, the local level government representatives, and less of a focus on women, youth, and children. So what was the result? The narrative of the emergency response became really about basic human needs, which of course were significant, but rather than the very important protection and human rights issues that were just below the surface. And as we look towards year 2, also missing were questions about durable integrated solutions that involve, especially in livelihoods and skill building, that would need to involve women to be meaningful. So what was the journey that we took to address this problem? Well, we did know from the beginning that protection and gender concerns were there. Not a total surprise. And obviously coordination has been key. This has improved a significant amount over the first year within and across sectors and amongst agencies as well, so that has helped. As World Vision, one of the key actions that we took was to expand early on from basic life-saving interventions to include things like child protection, GBV, responding really to those intangible needs. But we also realized we needed a deeper understanding of what the community needs were, how they were evolving, and improved engagement with all of the community actors if we were going to hope for sustained interventions. So in July, in the last quarter of our year 1 response, we launched an in-depth needs assessment, and the goal was really to better target our programming and also prepare for year 2. So this time we went to 14 camps and the host community, made sure to more extensively involve children, women, other actors without as much power, pre-planning with sector consultations, and we went back to the question also of preferred methods of information sharing, because recent gender analysis by several partners shows that women are not getting the information. Actually, men also not getting basic information about the humanitarian response, but it's much more significant for women. And looking further at who are the most vulnerable, even within the camps where everybody has significant vulnerabilities. Who are the most vulnerable children? Who are the people living with disabilities? So that we can better target our response. So, a few key reflections. Many agencies, including, of course, World Vision, began responding rapidly without a deep understanding of what kind of crisis this was and how it might evolve. And due to the sensitivities in the context, the intangible needs were neglected early on to some extent, and even more significant perhaps, we are still challenged to address even intermediary interventions that can lead to more sustainable solutions. And probably my colleagues will say a bit more about that. What have we learned? It's an evolving context. Continuous dialogue with our beneficiaries, particularly women, youth, children, the most vulnerable, is key. And it needs to include all strata of the community. And to accomplish this, we have to navigate the gender power dynamics, the power dynamics between the Maji and the rest of the community, and also include the voice of youth. And if this becomes a protracted crisis, which I don't think there's anyone that doesn't think it will, the most important buy-in has to be from the host communities. And as more intermediate interventions become possible, for instance, increased use of cash, livelihoods interventions, skill buildings in the camps themselves, we must ensure that there's access by women.
Thank you. Walter?
Well, good afternoon, and I first must start with a few disclaimers. I am Chief of Party on Shohado 3, so I do not work in Cox's Bazar. However, as a member of CARE Bangladesh's senior leadership team, I sit on the emergency response team that also helps chart all what goes on in the country office. Secondly, I'll be explaining why Shohado was connected to the Cox's Bazar response, yet it's implemented in the northern part of the country. But I'd like to start with a story about my grandfather who fought in the war in Burma. When the British were recruiting people from my country to join the King's Army Rifles, KAR, as they called it, they would send them to different places. So my grandfather fought in Burma. My dad worked in Pakistan and India. And so my working in Bangladesh is pretty much bringing that full cycle in this particular area. So I feel like I have a personal connection with this. When I went to work for CARE, one of the things that I learned, my first job was in Somalia, so I've been intimately involved in responses, conflict, not this kind of displacement. I worked inside Somalia, not in the camps in northern Kenya. But I do feel that one of the things that we must talk about when we talk about emergencies and readiness is what's in your mind. I remember sitting in the first ERT meeting, emergency response team meeting, and we asked ourselves, what are we going to do with this? Something is happening right in front of our noses. And you know, the big question was, it's not even in our ERPP, Emergency Response Preparedness Plan. We didn't have the refugees coming into Bangladesh as part of our country plan for emergencies. There are cyclones, there are floods. Those things happen, but not 700,000 people flocking in a 3-4 month period. That was quite a tough conversation. I remember we started looking around, and CARE provides a country office with 50,000 euro to respond to a quick onset emergency like this particular one. 50,000 euro was going to do nothing in Cox's Bazar as the numbers kept pouring in. So in one of those meetings, I remember we talked about, okay, so what can we do? We don't have the money. No project had that kind of money sitting somewhere. And one of the quick things we had to talk about was, what can we do? And someone remembers that Shohado had, in the past, capacity to move development resources in form of food to an emergency. But this wasn't the regular emergency, right? So we're moving from northern Bangladesh to southeastern Bangladesh. That's not really appropriate. And so at my personal level, I thought, no, we can't send any food from warehouses in northern Bangladesh to the refugee camps. And so I do remember my country director saying, why don't we try it? No, let's just try it. If we don't get the approval, that's fine. And fortunately, I think as a chief of party, you kind of get to do an annual pilgrimage to the US one way or the other. So I was on one of those pilgrimages, meeting USAID and CARE people back in the US. And that was around the same time that these things were going on. So at that time, I was able to have a conversation with our AOR. And, you know, believe it or not, 120 metric tons sounds little with the numbers, was availed and approved for us from transfer from our program down to Cox's Bazar. And I'll guarantee you that was really the first footing that brought CARE into that process. Again, what are the lessons? We did not have huge resources. We didn't have so much to get in there. But the one thing that was clear in the team that day when we start was we're getting in there. All right? We started talking about recruitments. Who's funding those recruitments? There was no money, there was no budget. Unfortunately, Shohado 2 had actually just closed operations in 2015 in Cox's Bazar. So we had a mental idea what was going on in Cox's Bazar, at least with the host community. But really, there was no real significant presence that we could count on. There was no staff, all right? And most of our staff were not even emergency-minded staff, you know, because we work on floods, not refugees. One of the conversations that I do remember having in the country office was, what do we even do? Which sectors do we go into? Now, that's an interesting conversation being CARE, because we were very sure that we wanted to be doing something on women and girls. Sexual and reproductive health was our priority. But you don't have any resources. Neither do you have anybody who actually can come to you because you're not there in the first place. So we went in with the 120 metric tons of food and 50,000 euro and partnered with WFP and a number of other local organizations and began to set up operations. So that may sound like it's appropriate or it's enough, but the immediate needs were not on sexual reproductive health. That's not what you do when people start flocking in, right? So we had to figure out how do you get into something that gives you a presence. And so we talked about shelter. Now globally, we are not an organization that does a lot of work in shelter. So that was another big challenge for us talking to our global leadership and other people. But we were able to prevail upon that. The only way, upon the teams in the HQ and the decision-making process, that the only way we are ever going to be in these camps doing something for the women and girls is to actually be there. And right now, people need accommodation. People need a place to stay. And so if we don't get in there, we're probably going to be out. So eventually, this is an evolution that just went on through the period that we were in. That early first 3 months between August and December, I would say, were really the critical moments. But the evolution for me goes back to those specific decisions that were taken early on. We, as an organization, CARE, have the mandate to work on humanitarian crises, wherever they are, where we are present. And so this wasn't an option. But resource or no resource, staff or no staff, we just had to go in. Do we feel we were responsible in what we did? I would say yes. I mean, CARE went in and did the first rapid gender assessment analysis, and that has been applied by pretty much every person that is working in that area. We may have led to a number of other specific approaches that people adopted on. The safe spaces for women is something that we're really proud of. We've been working in outreach services for health. And some of those are beginning to become like what every organization is being asked to. So instead of having clinics where people go to, we are sending out outreach teams to the specific camps. You all are aware about how the conservative culture of these people may hinder women and girls from stepping up. The challenges that came up, remember a lot of these women had been raped and they were pregnant. They needed prenatal care. So all that stuff was going on while we're still struggling to bring in our resources and bring in the appropriate stuff. The other thing that I would just like to say in this context about how we were able to get in there is CARE has worked in Bangladesh for many, many years. And I mean, since Bangladesh was Bangladesh and even before. So since 1940s, I think we are on the 72nd year or something like this. But what's interesting is, I think every office I've gone to and talked to a government official, they'll go like, oh, you work for CARE? Yeah, we remember CARE. And I don't say that's going to happen for every organization, but I do feel that having that edge helped us move very quickly on a number of things, including the very infamous FD 6s and 7s that those who've worked in Bangladesh understand. There's government letters that you need to sign up new programs and get work permits for your staff. So we had an edge in that and were able to move quite quickly as we talked to government officials, trusted partner. That was quite useful for us. What is my reflection? So my first trip to Cox's Bazar was for a meeting. And in that meeting, I went parasailing. So you can actually do parasailing in Cox's Bazar. That was before the refugees came in. I went there again 3 weeks ago. There was no time to think about parasailing. The needs and the chaos that we've seen with this influx is something that causes anybody who has a heart for humanity to really think about what we need to do. So my parting words is, it doesn't matter how unprepared, how much unresourced you feel you are, I believe we all have a place, and we should continue to push to help make this world a better place for especially the unfortunate ones. Thank you.
Thank you, Walter.
Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen, and I really thank you for your interest to listen to the learning from the Rohingya response. Unlike other organizations, currently around 150 national and international NGOs are working in Cox's Bazar, including around 40-45 international NGOs. Unlike other organizations, Save the Children has been working in refugee context in Cox's Bazar for since 2012, after the reunification of Save the Children. Before that, we also had our education program. Just before the influx, we were 15 person in team. Now we are around 800 staff, including 1,000 volunteers. So the scale up is huge, and the need and ensuring quality and responding to the needs is also demanding more and more every day. So for integration, my topics, I would like to show you some photos before I move to. So this is the very first day, very first week, I should say, when we start responding to the Rohingya in the first week of September. So we transferred our pre-positioned item stored in other part of Bangladesh, in northern and southern part, and we distributed, and the road was look like that. This is the main road, connection to the main road, and literally there was no connectivity. So we had to hand carry the items to the people. And this is the road look like, and it was raining, and the shelter. So you see most of the houses are in the flood areas, in a risk of landslides. So the people the Rohingya who has got a space in the camps, they establish their shelter by themselves, wherever they got the place, and how with their little effort. And in that situation, actually, every agencies started from their pre-positioned or emergency stocks to respond. And at that time, we did not think about integration, because we just worked. We just wanted to jump into the situation and try to assist what we have. Fortunately, before this response in Cox's Bazar in 2016, there was another influx for around 80,000 Rohingya came to Bangladesh. And the coordination structure was still there. And I can still remember, even in the first week or second week of the September, when the ISCG, Intersector Coordination Group, we used to meet every day, and we were discussing what it would be look like, the caseload. People were bargaining 100,000, 50,000, 200,000. None could believe that even it could be 250,000. But it reached within 2 months to 700,000 new influx, including old, it will be more than 1 million. So program integration is crucial to support to be more efficient in delivery of success. So I would like to highlight some of our integration activities within Save the Children and also with some other agencies. So we started with the food assistance program that at that time WP just started from the very first week with only rice, and the other agencies including community and private donor, they also started distributing rice and other food basket items. So when we realized this, WP have enough rice, but people need more supplementary item. The cooperating partner, the complementary partner, we exclude rice from our food basket and complemented our pulse, oil, and salt and other items with WP rice, so that people get better food basket and better nutritious value. And also it is more cost effective, and we can reach to more people with this effort. And then wash, health and nutrition, we merged these three activities at field because and also community messaging. Just think about a scenario. So if your organization have responding in 7 sectors and you send 7 staffs from each sector to one beneficiaries to build awareness, to share information, to distribute token, to collect relief items. So how it will look like? People will be just confused. And on the other hand, if you in the camp level meeting, if you send 7 representatives from 7 sectors from one organization, how it will be look like at that case? So, and it's only for one organization. If you think about 140 organizations, so the program integration at field level, we started at the very beginning how we can integrate more, and like community engaging, and like parenting session, and also education, protection and psychosocial support in the same facilities, and also the community infrastructure like wash program, engaging community people, and the health messaging, and within the nutrition program, blanket supplementary feeding with other treatment activities with other actors, so at field. So we started communicating each other. It's still a long way to go for to be more integrated, but I think we are now in better shape than considering if you consider the last year and the first few months of this year. So and also the in the community messaging messaging part, community is in center of the response, and my co-presenter mentioned the language is a big barrier to communicate with the people. So engaging the local people is was one of the key issues, and every agencies and also from the government and from the political side, everyone was saying to engage local people so that we can maintain host and Rohingya issues, and also from our side we also try to engage local people just to have better access to the people on our community community reach to the community. And in that component, we included all of our health, nutrition, wash, messaging, community awareness, including our parent communication, and also we also included the psychosocial support for the adult who need it, and also we included adolescent girl support with psychosocial support and education. Now we are working closely with other actors, particularly in the sectors, to have more coordination among the agencies. And as response is now, I think we passed the acute life-saving phase. Now we are phasing to more lengthy chronic emergency phase. So integration and better communication among agencies is still needed to explore, and we are working on that in the field. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mahin. So before we go into the general Q&A, I wanted to ask you guys one question. And as we all know, not only is this a human crisis, but it's also a crisis in politics. And every week now, everyone around the world just sees the news, and there's constant development around this issue. So one question that we had for you guys is, what is the next year going to look like in your response?
Well, next year, 2019, is very crucial, because this year actually we will see what the situation will be. Will it be another 2 decades, more than 2 decades situation like we had since 1992? We already have 2 refugee camps in Cox's Bazar since 1992, or there will be some changes. So election is planned in last week of December or in the January of 2019. So election will be a key guidance, political change to decide. But mostly unofficially, government start recognizing that this problem is not solving soon, and they start from government side, they recognizing to have midterm plan. And our Prime Minister in UN Convention emphasized on education. That also indicates that government started changes in government mind is happening. This is a good sign for us. And responses like the situation is very vulnerable, very high dense living condition, exposed to flood, cyclone, and landslide. So always there could be a chance of emergency within emergency situation. Even cold, extreme cold could be a fact for disease outbreak. And disease outbreak is also a risk for these people. And I think from our side, from Save the Children, we are planning more stabilized program, integrated program, sector-based approach for the upcoming 2 years at least. And in 2019, I think in education we will see some key changes in approach, I expect though. And in food and food side, we are expecting that we would be able to transfer kind food distribution to shop vouchers, so that people have better access to food and diversified food. And in approaches, we will have more control from the government, particularly access and visa on arrival for the expatriate to work in the camp, and more nationalized staffing we will see. And I now hand over to.
Right. So again, I think I just want to confirm what Mahina said. It's definitely, and everyone agrees, it's a protracted crisis, going to be dragging longer than we can all accept, or we all. I think we all knew it, but it wasn't endorsed. I mean, when we started working there, they'd only give three-month projects and work permits for staff. That was really difficult even to recruit anybody. But I think things are changing. Now, in terms of programmatic, I think the biggest focus for us, and I guess for the entire community, is really looking at what's going on with the host community vis-a-vis the refugees, and how do we integrate that process. So a lot of focus now is moving to looking at this as a longer-term process, the impact of the presence of the refugees that we actually do not call refugees in Bangladesh yet, is that a lot of natural resources have been affected. We are concerned about the water levels, the underground water levels, even within the camps. So people are having to dig much deeper water tube wells to get to, the real water that's not contaminated because of also the big concentration of communities. The other thing that we think is really beginning to build up, and we think we will have to be concerned about in a much more concise manner, is really looking at how do we provide income opportunities, even though still restricted for the refugees. I mean, we can provide all the food and everything that you want to people, but they have needs. They have to get something by themselves. They need to begin to live as human beings and be able to provide for themselves. We still don't have that space. It's very limited. And so we are not able to do like any income promotion among the refugees. We know most of them by now have lost all their whatever they had saved and brought along, it's all gone. It's been sold or been used for whatever purposes. So now we're looking at a community that's almost 100% dependent on what we're doing, and that really needs to change for dignity purpose, but also just to meet basic needs of these people. So in terms of that, and then the last thing I would just say is the stretch on the natural environment is going to really last long. I think Mahina has talked about cyclones and floods. The potential for landslides and all this is getting greater as we affect, the environment where these camps are located around. And that said, we still don't know when people go back. So I think you kind of beginning to think about a year where you do what you need to do now, but really invest in a forecast of the unknown that we do believe is going to be much longer than we can all anticipate at this point. Thank you.
Thanks. I won't repeat what my colleagues have said, but in year 2, really, host community focus is key. World Vision, like other organizations, has a long history in the host community. We had just wrapped up, I think a couple months before the influx, a 15, 20-year multi-sectoral development project in Cox's Bazar. We're about to launch another one in Ukiah. All told, we are reaching or starting to reach almost 100,000 people in the host community. However, there's a lot more needs, and they are, I would say, the most important stakeholder. But it's a small baby step process. Right now, we are still advocating, slowly, to be able to even, do the basics. So use of cash in the camps is still very limited. And unconditional cash, I believe, is pretty unheard of. Even the use of fresh food vouchers is still a modality that needs to be scaled. It's still emerging. So these are basic. And as we've said, really genuine livelihoods and skills building activities are desperately needed in the camps. And I think we can all agree these are both in the short term and long term, in the interest of the host communities. If these people are not going anywhere, we have to find ways not only for them to lessen the burden on the host communities, which is significant, but also integrate, link into the markets, the economies, and contribute something over time to give back. And so longer term, in year 2, hopefully, we'll be looking to build those intentional linkages, things like peace building, particularly among the youth. Tensions are starting to simmer, and that cannot be good. So, and expanding to some other sectors, such as, of course, education. There's some space now, DRR, increasing there, but really the host community is the key. this point in time.
Fantastic. All right, so that's a lot of information to process, and we want to open up the floor to any questions that anyone might have for these three. There are mic runners around, so just raise your hand if you have a question or maybe even a comment or reflection on what was being said today. How many people in the room actually have been involved in the crisis response, in the Rohingya crisis response? Raise your hands. Raise them high. High. Okay. Do any of you have any similar stories or any similar points that you'd like to make around some of these themes that we discussed? Or maybe have some of your own suggestions of what is going to come in the next year? Right here in the front. BK?
Hello, this is Polash. I also work with CARE Bangladesh. So I'm deeply involved in this response initiative. I'm supporting on the contingency plan. You know, we have some contingency plan at CARE level, considering the landslides and other thing. You know, heavy rainfall and cyclones. I'm also involved in the host community activities. We have a 100% host community program now in Cox's Bazar. So we are supporting host community with livelihoods, DRR, and wash facilities, also shelter. So recently we have conducted one kind of host community analysis and found that there is a growing tension, between host community and the guest communities. This is one area, and this is intensifying. And this is one area where we have, we need to focus on for our future programming, because there is a kind of feeling within the host community. They are thinking that their problems are being ignored by the agencies, because whatever we are doing for the guest communities, rather, supporting the host communities. They are also affected. Their employment has gone down. Their other economic opportunities have gone down. Their mobility is restricted now. They cannot go for fishing. They cannot venture into the forest resources. So they are also, they have also kind of insecurity feeling within them, because if something happens between these two groups, host and guest, so hosts are becoming, minority there now. So this is their own land. They have a feeling that this is my ancestral home, but we are here, now kind of very, how can I say? They are not feeling well there. So, and our government, they are also putting pressure on the international communities. So we should spend at least 25% of the resources for the host communities. So this is one area, as Rachel was mentioning, that we already entered into the year 2. So there is a kind of, we need to refocus our, activity. We need to address also the problems of the host communities. That will, ease some tensions between host and guest. So this is what I'm adding in this discussion.
Thank you. BK, there's one right back there. Yeah.
Great. Thank you first to the presenters for great presentations, and thank you very much for highlighting the needs of the host communities. I think those of us that have been working in Cox's Bazar and on the response are really aware of it, and the need for that additional focus in the coming year, and hopefully for some more ability and freedom to work with both communities together around social cohesion as well. I wanted to ask specifically a little bit about localization. I think, one of the things that we're very aware of is that this was an unprecedented influx and really not anticipated by anyone. However, Bangladesh does have a really long history of emergencies and emergency response and really strong local organizations. I know our colleague here on the end mentioned a little bit about localizing in terms of staff, but I'm wondering how you've been working with local organizations as well, recognizing that this response is likely to go on for many years. We may not mention it out loud, but I think many of us are aware of how many Rohingya have already settled in Bangladesh and have not gone back, and that it's likely that this will continue into the decades rather than just the years. So would just be interested in how you're thinking about that and approaching it.
Very good question.
Thank you. Actually, now, as I said earlier, around more than 100 local and national NGOs are working, which were not present before 2017. At the time, only 5 or 6 local and national level NGOs were there, and some of the NGO has been working only in the camps. They have no other activities outside the camps. So currently, I believe that the NGOs of Bangladesh has a very good expertise in civil society and good history of NGO operations. Still, we need Bangladesh in this response. We need external support from technical and operational point of view. But at ground level, at operations, I think last 1 year, many NGOs able to position themselves in the ground. Lot of stuffs by this time, I said around 10,000, roughly estimated, around 10,000 Bangladeshi staffs, NGO workers are now working in the camps. They have a chance to work with the expatriate and technical expertise. They will be ready soon, but honestly speaking, not now, even not in the first 2 or 3 quarters of 2019. Still, we need support from the technical expert around the globe.
Maybe just very quickly, KIA just completed our midterm review of the strategy that we had in this particular area, and kind of just 2 reflections on the partners, but also on staffing. We set out with only actually 1 full-time and 2 staff that had moved over from Myanmar into Bangladesh for our operations. So pretty much 3 people. We do feel that the growth of the operation actually requires a little more than that. And I think as Mahin is saying, not that capacity is always in there. So actually the trend is we're seeing more and more kind of more right fit expatriates coming in than the original surge capacity. Most organizations will send in teams that do not deploy longer term. And so that's what we've been having. And that's changing now because you now have longer term contracts and people that will probably see through a longer process than initially had been thought. So in terms of reductions, I think budgets and others will determine that, but I do feel that there's still need for that external capacity at this point, as Mahin says, as the Bangladeshis and the local capacity is being developed. When it comes to working with local partners, again, I think we just have to acknowledge that the challenges even the international organizations are facing with all the massive support we have from our global experiences, the local partners don't have that support most of the times. And so if we just let them on themselves, it's a risk. And I do agree, there's always the reality that we need to work with local partners. But I do feel that just because we're still grappling with the issues, working through a lot of this, that process will come on. But I would just say, like Mahin, it's going to come in the next maybe 2 to 3 years. I wouldn't be in a rush to push for that. I think we need to be serving the needs of these people as appropriately as is possible at this point. Thank you.
Just to highlight 2 additional issues. One is there has been a lot of capacity building effort and investment into the national and local NGOs, which is great, but it's been hampered, and this is hearing from my partners and other colleagues in national NGOs, is that the forced turnover, pretty extreme turnover of sector leads, of even UN focal points, as well as INGO staff doing a lot of the capacity building, has hampered this because of the visa and other issues and funding challenges. The second thing is that there's a fierce competition for talent going on in Cox's Bazar. World Vision, although technically we're an international NGO, we have 10 expatriates in the response, 180 Bangladeshi staff, as many as possible from Cox's Bazar, Chittagong Division, and then 500 volunteers who are all local. But what we are finding is that, again, when I talk to local NGO partners, national NGO, their staff are quickly poached by UN, INGOs. Everybody is desperate for the talent. Without the people, we can't deliver much at all. So that's a reality that we also have to grapple and face when we think about localization. Just practical reality.
BK?
I just would like to share some of the learning with these Bhutanese refugees in Nepal through Lutheran World Federation I worked with. I think two learnings that would be, I think, useful for the context in Cox's Bazar. One is developing the committees representing the refugees and also host communities so that they are involved in the planning, making decisions. And the second learning is the social cohesion, between host communities and refugees. So that is really necessary. So if you would like to begin any livelihood activities, that should be, I think, of interest to both host communities. That would benefit host communities and also refugees. Yeah. So I think those two, I would think maybe, useful. Maybe there are lots of other learning that would be useful, but maybe you have to contact, maybe World Food Program was involved there, Lutheran World Federation and UNHCR were involved there. Yeah, so.
Yeah, and I think they're very necessary points. And that actually brings me to my next question for you guys is, and I know you all touched on this a little bit, but what have you actually heard from the refugees themselves as what they need? What kind of assessments have you done and what kind of conversations have you had? And what do they tell you that they actually need for themselves to be comfortable?
I think education, every time we talk, both anecdotally and do surveys, formalized assessments, education is coming through loud and clear. So that's something that World Vision is also focused on, starting, hopefully integrated with the ongoing protection needs. Yeah, that's the most compelling one.
So I kind of have, as I said, we just completed our midterm review, so I kind of have a little more precise points on this one. So definitely we've had a lot of fair appreciation of what's going on from the host community, not just by CARE, by most of the other organizations. But they also would like to see a bit of timeliness in terms of the things that we do. Oftentimes they'll know about distributions, shelter, specific services, but just because of the logistical or other realities, they don't come on time. And so often that's a woman sitting somewhere waiting for something, a service that has been planned, say like distribution of water. They're all doing all these water structures across the camps, and they're taking quite a long time. And that's someone who needs to move a few places. We've seen changes in the sanitation processes in the camps, and those are also moving significantly, but still hasn't reached everybody. So I think they're still interested in that. The other thing that we found and are already working on is really the whole engagement process. And I think I'd just like to thank our colleague from Nepal, I'll learn your name someday, on the fact that the local community really needs to be engaged, especially the young girls, the women and the youth, really not traditionally from their home country part of their decision-making process. So going to the camps, you often would meet a lot of men on the streets, and then you'd see women peering from their houses. And so that's really reflective of how difficult it is to connect with them. So I think it's a challenge for organizations to really connect a little more with especially those groups, because some of the challenges they face may not be what comes in the mouth of the men or those that are free to walk around. I think the other process is the whole feedback mechanism. We are aware that a lot of us will put in, say, a suggestion box and something like that, but just due to the challenges that Rachel raised here, most people are not going to come and drop a paper somewhere in front of your big office. They need totally different mechanisms to be able to provide feedback to us as implementers and just offer suggestions on how we could better reach them. And so I'll just say that's a big one. Mine, from my last visit in the camps, it's just about the cooking materials. It's still a big issue. We still have women cooking with firewood in those tarpaulin shelters, risk of fire, smoke, anything you can talk about it. So I think we still have quite a number of areas that still need to be worked on. Thank you.
I want to add one thing, the community engagement, and you raised correctly, recently the existing community structure, the Majhi system, we started discussing to change it, because the Majhi they are not selected by the people, they are picked up by the army and the government. And so from the learning from the existing refugee camp, we had under UNHCR support, we had very good experience of selecting community leaders by themselves, and we are trying to reach there, and engagement of the leadership supported by the people is very important at that level.
BK, I think we had a question up here, and then we'll go in the back. Virginia, if you could just...
Yep. A couple of weeks back, I was reading some of the analysis in Bangladeshi newspaper, and it was talking about like the funding trend is continuously decreasing from the donor side particularly. So my question is, if it continues, what would be the scenario at the ground, and how do you see? Because and most importantly, I want to know what is the government, the preparation, particularly on this particular issue, and if there is any growing concern at the ground level by the local government, what is their preparation as well to tackle that particular scenario? So I want to know this particular aspect.
And then let's just take one more question back there. So we'll answer that one.
Yeah, so I just wanted to ask, so I'm based just across the border in Myanmar, and just wanted to know, in your agencies, how much is linked up across to the work that had actually happened in Myanmar? I mean, in many of when they were in the camps on the Rakhine side, a lot of work actually went into things like education and DRM. And so there's actually a lot of capacity within a lot of the Rohingya communities already. And I'm just wondering about how much of that experience is being picked up across the borders, within your agencies, who perhaps has experience on the Myanmar side. Like Mercy Corps just did a rapid kind of resilience assessment with the IOM in some of the camps. And the first thing that they did was actually identified that there was a lot of members of Rohingya civil society organizations who were already very skilled, had a lot of capacity, and they were using a lot of their time collecting fuel wood, and it was quite a waste of their time because they've already got strong mobilization capacities. So I'm just wondering how much is happening between the two countries and whether the teams in your agencies are quite well linked.
So who'd like to take the first one?
I'll start with the government and the funding situation, and then I'll hand over in terms of the other work there. But just very quickly, I think we must all applaud the government of Bangladesh for all the work they have done with this. I think no matter what we may think about as restrictions, I think they have been extremely generous in hosting these people and providing for services. They continue to expand the infrastructure in that particular area and are continuously providing support whichever way. As someone did mention, we're seeing work permits are now being issued up to 1 year. When we started, it was 3 months. So I think a bit of that sits with us in terms of beginning to build a stronger advocacy and just making sure that the government is getting the right information. When it comes to the funding, and I just wanted to share this because it's an experience that I ran into. We just ran into a wealthy bunch of Americans that just came there and they wanted to fund something, but they don't want to work with an NGO. That's a challenge, and that was really interesting. Then we hosted them, and they went into the camps, looked at the camps, and they just wanted to identify what specific resources. And they were talking about tens of millions of dollars, not just little money. So I think the opportunities for funding exist. I will keep my positive attitude to everything on this particular one. I just feel we need to be a little creative, and especially as we begin to engage in the host community funding, which is probably easier for donors. I'm sure you said it is listening. But it's probably easier, but how we make those connections and begin to create a more solid link in terms of more sustainable outcomes for the refugees. So I am not going to argue that the funding is all there, but I just feel that's a reality of funding across the world, and we just have to play our part in attracting resources as possible. But I also do feel there's the need for lobbying, and again, I think the government of Bangladesh is really making a big effort at that too. Thank you.
Regarding the funding issue, JRP, Joint Response Plans, developed by the UN system and participated from the active members. The JRP revision process is going on. And all of us are we start discussing to be more efficient and cost effective in terms of funding is decreasing in considering that in mind. And particularly for the connection with the Myanmar side, we actually in the field we are not prepared that they have some expertise. We didn't know even about it. But when we went to recruit a volunteer from the community, we got surprised that some of them are really expert in civil service, not civil service, sorry, in NGO works, like in community supporting and the messaging. And we always emphasize, because this is ready workforce to have, to work with, and it's good human resource for us.
Yeah, to address the second question first, World Vision's response, the refugee response, is actually jointly organized with our team in Myanmar and Bangladesh. Although, obviously, we have better access on the Bangladesh side, as you can imagine. And I think what the gentleman said is absolutely right. In fact, we've seen that some of the tensions between host community and refugees are that among the refugee community, not surprisingly because they're so much more numerous than host community in almost all the areas, include people who do have higher levels of education, more sophisticated livelihood skills. And so that's part of the jealousy and tension that we're starting to see. And interestingly enough, tragically, actually about 10 World Vision former staff in the Rakhine area were among those who fled. So thankfully we were able to identify that and make sure that we supported them as well. But yeah, those skills need to be, are being leveraged as agencies recruit facilitators from among the refugees, as we scale up education, try to find people who can be skilled teachers, be trained, so that will be useful. Just on the funding issue, I think important to remember that adequate funding of the response is pretty intrinsically linked to other global objectives for durable solutions, including refugee status for the Rohingya. So it's not just about meeting the needs, although obviously that's critical.
Thank you. Is there anyone else? All right, so I do have a question for you guys to think about, and I want you to think about, with the reflections that you've had and the things that we've just discussed, what should we start doing, what should we continue to do, and what should we stop doing going forward? And Walter seems like he already has a thought put together.
Well, I mean, as I said, I'm not intricately involved, but I think I have a fair understanding. So I'll kind of jump onto what Rachel just completed here with. And I think one of the things that I found very challenging is just how we define the Rohingya. When you go to Myanmar, there's a definition. When you go to Bangladesh, the government will call them forcibly displaced Myanmar nationals. And I think the point is they are not even achieving the refugee status, which is really challenging a lot of what we want to do. So yes, we can do a few things here and there, but we have a real situation on our hands, and until we can resolve that, that seems to be probably bigger than any of the three of us seated here. But I think it just needs to be addressed, because as we think about durable actions to address in this situation, I just feel there are things that had not been touched. Now, if that's taboo enough, I think 1 million people affected should be the real cry that, you know, allows us to make some actions on that. So I just think we need to fix that for now, as we do other things, of course, but it's one of your priorities there. I mean, I think Mahin talked a lot about coordination, and I just want to challenge the donors here. I've talked to a few donors who are funding projects in the refugee camps, and I mean, we challenge NGOs to coordinate, but I don't think the donors are themselves very coordinated. I hate to say this. And so I think we kind of want, some leadership there. They have better sway with government and obviously with us because they'll give the money. But just being able to put that together and bring a better perspective will probably make some of the issues that Mahin raised as a challenge for us to be a little better. And then obviously I think there's just all the misconceptions and the stereotypes that we have about communities, and I think that has been talked a lot. So we just need to embrace, again, this as a people with dignity, with capacities, with resources, and I think just being able to move on with that would be pretty much what I would pitch for in terms of how we engage with the refugees. So thank you.
So what should we start at this point? I think we should work, we should start collectively do some advocacy work towards government from all the angles that we do need mid-term to long-term planning for this. Just not for better programming, but also for cost effectiveness and also sustained support. We have been building our facilities already 3 times. Some buildings require 3 times maintenance, which is just wastage of money. And every time we have to think next phase of FD7 approval. So from that side, advocacy side, I think this should be we should have at this level. And also from programmatic side, we all are working mostly on children, women, elderly, but the big portion, the youth are excluded yet. We are not able to engage them in any activities yet. We have to start programming with youth because they are more exposed to crime and trafficking. So this is
Yeah, my colleagues have touched on several macro issues that are absolutely critical as we look into this second year, which has already begun. But taking us back down to ground level on some of the micro issues, again, I think addressing the gender dynamics, some of the gatekeepers of information flowing both ways, so that youth, particularly girls, children, boys and girls, and women can receive the information, feedback, participate meaningfully, begin. World Vision also, with the UN's assistance, is starting to form committees that don't necessarily have the MAJI as their automatic leader. These are baby steps. But this is going to have a practical implication. Because when you look at nutrition, for example, we've seen the SAM rate now come down to roughly on par with the host community, right? MAM rates are, still there, problematic, but what is it going to take now to move the needle on this? Next steps, obviously, are going to be about infant and young child feeding practices, hygiene practices, those social norms that are tougher to change, and if we can't directly dialogue and spend time, hear from women, hear from adolescents who are the caregivers in many cases, keep them busy, keep them engaged and part of this response, the things that affect their lives, we're not going to move the needle. And so we are really already moving into the rest of this response, which could be years and years. And so those micro issues are going to be really critical as well.
Thank you. And we have some questions in the back.
This is Rafiqul Islam from Bangladesh, Navajatra program. I heard that the recommendation for doing advocacy with government for long-term planning. So along with this, can the NGO community do advocacy with the global leaders to save return to this the people, to their country? So that's another other part of the coin maybe need to be considered. Thank you.
This is the ultimate durable solution of this crisis. So we know that the crisis will be over when people will have safe repatriation, and we should we should advocate for this first. And I think this is in the priority one with all level of discussion, so that refugee can repatriate with respect, dignity, and safely to their own origin place.
So,
PK.
yeah, this is Shofik from USAID, Dhaka. So, I had experience to work with refugees in 1992. And you know, around 300,000 refugees came at that time. And to get repatriated, it took long time, more than 2 decades, but still all were not repatriated. But this time, that is adding up more 700,000 plus refugees over there. So as long as the refugees are there in Cox's Bazar, definitely from the humanitarian point of view, the programmatic activities to be carried on. But at the same time, it is really important to get involved or to lobby with the global leaders should come forward for the repatriation. Yes, definitely we will do, but it is not easy because our past experience does not say so. So this is important. Thank you.
I find it interesting that there's a lot of comments about the world leaders need to step up, but at the same time, there has been a lot of talk about the local politicians also need to come up with a strategy and a plan. And it seems like the elections are going to be the place and time for a lot of these issues to be sorted. And then everything after the elections, that's when everything's going to be kind of sorted and kind of laid out for everyone to be able to respond to. Is that still true?
Particularly, we are expecting a new policy from the government level after the election, and we don't know yet what it will look like. But the island issue and repatriation, expediting the repatriation, and mostly the government officials in person, when they discuss, still people are coming in very small amount, but a small number, but still people are coming. So government officials recognize that influx and repatriation could not go together. So I think after the election it will be a key game changer.
Great. Anyone else? Virginia?
Hello, I'm Nutan, working at the Save the Children in Bangladesh. So Mahim had just touched my questions like this island issue. Yeah? So government is planning to have like the island development and shift those like the refugee to the island. So if it is going to be happen, like how the role of the donor and the INGO and how you are looking the response dynamics will change in 2019. So like what is the preparation from the humanitarian sector, like we are there at the bends?
Well, island issue is currently little bit sensitive, and people we don't feel comfortable to discuss about it. It is in the priority of government, and even we saw the special envoy of Canada to the Myanmar and Bangladesh. We saw that there are no straightforward issues regarding these island or relocating to the island issues. But we saw some photos that government has invested a lot of money and a lot of infrastructure work is happening there. From organizational level, we believe that relocation should be voluntarily, and this is the key. This should be the key in key issues to select who will be relocated, and the safety of people need to be ensured. I want to add, but frankly speaking, I don't have any straightforward answer whether it will happen or it will not. What we should say, we will not agree or we will agree. I think time is not correct. This is not the right time to talk about these yes no issues. But we talk with government that with maintaining the voluntarily and the safety issues.
So Walter seems like he agrees. And Rachel?
Just back to the issue of elections, I think we all agree that there'll be some more significant contextual shifts and loosening of some of the current sensitivities, perhaps around March when things settle post-election. However, I think important to emphasize that every day we are seeing gradual opening, gradual. And so certainly, as Walter, you said, the donor's voice has been among the most instrumental. USAID mission in Dhaka has certainly been very influential in this. And being able to have conversations directly with USAID and other donors to inform, share information, but then rely upon that diplomacy is very helpful for us as implementers. And it's crucial leading up to the election as well. We don't want that to stop. It is valuable. It is making a difference. And then we hope that that window that keeps opening will open widely and maybe a door too post-election.
There's a question right here. Mark.
Yeah, Mark Fritzler, TOPS. I know we don't have too much time left, and I just wanted to mention both to you, Mache, and Sheila, that we do know that you tried very hard to try to get WFP representation on this panel. And they're a key, obviously, player in this role, as well as other UN agencies. And this is a very probably difficult question to answer, but if a WFP representative were here, can any of you talk about what they might have said in telling their story? Just a couple of key points, and also how they see their role and how you see their role in terms of in both the present time as well as going forward.
That's one question.
I would never presume to speak for any of my colleagues, let alone WFP, but I can say...
It wasn't a fair question, but I'm asking you to answer it.
I won't answer your specific questions, but just in the spirit, I think the UN's role in this emergency in particular has been absolutely critical. WFP among the key players. One of the positives is the food pipeline has been continuous, thank goodness, and their support and their collaborative working style with us, I think, has been among the best I've seen. So that's as an implementing partner, we have no complaints. I think because we work so closely and we are several UN partners actually, not only WFP, have told me we really consider you as a partner. We need you to think of yourselves as a partner, not a sub-grantee, not, don't think of us as a donor. And I think it is because these issues are so complex, they move quickly, they are so, even government levels, there are so many levels, there are individual personalities, all of these moving parts, and they have treated us, as close working allies, and I think for that reason you would hear much of the same answers from them.
I mean, I've kind of touched base with WFP on a few times, mostly operational for food issues and many other things, and I think what I'm aware of is it's not always that the pipeline has been like fully funded, and I think they've struggled a bit sometimes. What I think has been also important is that they've been actually able to do a lot of local procurement in Bangladesh for some of that stuff, which is obviously something that's helpful in terms of relations with the government and the local community. But I think, as Rachel said, their coordination effort, especially with the pipeline and logistical issues, has been, I think, from what we hear, quite phenomenal. Thank you.
Actually, I am very close with WFP. The program I led is supported by WFP. And I think if WFP representative is here, they may focus on the first phase of response when it was a huge chaotic situation. People are not registered. We don't know who is who. And at that situation, WFP extended their food assistance to the beneficiaries. And now we just completed our we just started our 25th round general food distribution. That indicates you can count 2 rounds per month. So the first round started in September, and first round after the influx. So from very fast, very at the day zero or from the day zero, WFP extended their support to provide food, and it was key issues that help stabilize the situation. The situation we assumed much more stabilized it was, and the food is the key dynamics for that.
And I think in the time it took us to answer that question, we found someone from the WFP. Go ahead. Virginia's coming over behind you.
Hello. Good afternoon. My name is Britta Schumacher. I'm the Regional Nutrition Advisor for WFP based here in Bangkok. I happened to come back from Cox's Bazar yesterday from a short trip, but I wouldn't be in the same position to answer these questions as my colleagues on the ground, of course. But I want to echo a few things that I've heard from you on the podium and from the audience. So it's very clear that there need to be a move towards better understanding the needs of the people. We've just had this discussion over the past few days with the partners on what we do not know about the decisions that are taken at household level in favor or in disfavor of who in the family, what are the power elements within the household, what decisions can women take as compared to men, as compared to mothers-in-law, etc., that influence what is being purchased, what is being sold in terms of food security, nutrition supplies, and other supplies, and knowing that these interact, obviously, because the needs are much broader than just food in the household. And so the need to do some formative research has been identified, and together with partners we are looking into that, because we are moving forward with the e-voucher system from food to e-voucher and eventually, as has been raised, to cash programming. And we would like to use this opportunity to before we continue moving forward with that, to really understand those choices, because the systems that we have in place currently, we are learning many things from that, from what is purchased from retailers, what is sold, and what is repurchased from little shops close by the households, etc. So all these things need to be better understood in order to also fine-tune the food security and nutrition responses and the other responses that link to cash programming in Cox's Bazar. The other point that I want to make is that because we are talking about the involvement of the government of Bangladesh, for WFP, for the first part of the response, it has been extremely important to get the loan. The collaboration with the government has actually permitted to provide food assistance and the rice that we were talking about to the Rohingya refugees, because a big portion of the rice has been a loan from the government of Bangladesh. And without that, the assistance would not have been possible. It's a loan and needs to be repaid, but it really made that response possible for a large part of the refugees. So I just wanted to emphasize that. The other point is that, yes, there's also a need to look forward into 2019 to strengthen livelihoods and resilience programming and discussions. I mean, it's not a surprise because we have the coordination mechanisms in place, that those discussions are happening within all the partners, obviously including WFP. And whatever is possible in that context, given that certain restrictions are in place, need to be taken into account. It will probably be a mix of programmatic approaches, trying to take into account the interactions with the host populations. And WFP has had for many years also programs in the host populations. And even before September 2017, we were already looking into the interactions between host community and the registered around 30,000 refugees at that time, knowing that some of them were actually frequenting the health posts outside the camps and vice versa. And that had an impact on, information sharing, and knowing that sometimes the assistance was perceived as being better than what the host populations were getting, etc. So I think there are many lessons to be learned also from that time that can be taken into account when we move forward. Thank you.
Thank you. And we do have a couple minutes left before we adjourn this plenary. And I wanted just to give our panelists a chance to give some final remarks. And also maybe just give us a little answer to what do you think personally we still don't know about this crisis? And what kind of things do we need to put our efforts into to actually figure out?
Gosh. Yeah, some things we know that we don't know, and other things we don't know yet that we don't know. But as, was it Bradine? Rita from WFP said, we're starting to at least understand, what information we still need, what type of engagement we need. Household level, certainly. Going down to the household level and looking at some of these things, purchasing decisions, household, diversity of food diversity. The choices still aren't there at scale. We need to scale up interventions even to get them to the point where they can make those decisions. Also, on the protection side, with the gender concerns, looking into World Vision has already made plans with partners to look into gender-based violence to see what is actually happening on the ground. That's an area where we know it's happening. We're doing case management, but going deeper into root causes and what we can do about it is the next frontier. So, yeah, I think making sure that we continue to maintain that operational space and getting smarter about how to engage communities in ways where they hear that voices will create that enabling environment to get this information and feed it back to the people we serve as well.
So I'll start with what we know. I was just telling a colleague 2 weeks ago while I was in Cox's that guaranteed there will be a movie 4 or 5 years from now about the boy who lived in Camp 15. Now for us, that's going to be a story of inspiration. That's going to be a story that, kind of is a reward or a thank you to all of us and those who have spent time trying to do something in these camps. I think it's also a call to really make sure that we're giving an appropriate, intervention and response. And difficult as it is, and as Mahin says, it's challenging. It's not something that's simple. So we do know that's an issue. What we don't know is really how long this is going to pan out for now, both in the Rakhine State and in Cox's Bazar. I think some of those uncertainties probably give us a focus that we also need to be thinking about how do we work in such a potentially quickly evolving environment in both sides of the two borders, of the border, I mean. Thank you.
Lastly, I want to request all of you to have some space for Rohingya response. Just it's unique in nature, and particularly the lack of hope of the community. If we think about it, actually, the program, the activities we are doing, all are for life saving. But what will happen? We have generations. Have been residing in 2 refugee camps for 26 years. More than 52% people born in Bangladesh of that particularly 34,000 people. So lack of hope is the quite frustrating for all of these people, and it will not be solved without a political solution, without durable solution, and actually we don't know what it will be look like in future. But from humanitarian perspective, we recognize that they need more support and guidance from us. Thank you very much.
So I want to thank all the panelists for taking the time and actually willing to share some of their stories with us and their experiences. And I think everyone agrees that we all wish you the best of luck in your work and safe travel home. Thank you. So that concludes our plenary.